This was the Mary Celeste, one of the most infamous vessels in history, and had been salvaged by these three men from the sailing ship Dei Gratia after the Mary Celeste was found adrift in the mid-Atlantic Ocean.
Most mysteries at sea end with a sinking ship and debris. The Mary Celeste is different because she refused to sink. She kept sailing for weeks after her crew disappeared, keeping their secret safe.
It is uncommon for a ship's crew to have completely vanished without any sign of struggle or peril, and for the ship to be able to continue on adrift in near-perfect condition.
Historians and scientists have spent a century trying to guess why a smart captain would abandon a safe ship in the middle of the ocean. They missed a crucial clue. A new analysis in 2025 has revealed a hidden failure on the ship that no one looked for. It explains why they left, and more importantly, why they could never get back. The discovery that scared the world. In early December of 1872, the Atlantic Ocean was a lonely, dangerous place. The British cargo ship Dei Gratia was fighting its way through rough seas, heading toward Gibraltar. The men on board were tired. They had been battling the gray waves and the biting wind for weeks. But then the lookout spotted something that made the hair on their arms stand up. Ahead of them, bobbing in the chop, was another ship. It was a brigantine, a two-masted vessel just like their own. But something was off. It was moving strangely, yawing back and forth as if the person at the wheel was not paying attention or asleep. The captain of the Dei Gratia, David Morehouse, signaled the ship. He waited for a flag, a wave, or a shout. He got nothing back but the sound of the wind hissing through the rigging. As they got closer, they read the name painted on the stern. Mary Celeste. Captain Morehouse knew that name. He knew the captain, Benjamin Briggs. They had shared a meal in New York just a month before. Briggs was a solid man, a veteran of the sea. He would never let his ship drift like this unless he was gone or in big trouble. Morehouse ordered a small team to row over and check it out. The sailors who climbed up the side of the Mary Celeste later said the silence was heavy enough to crush you. The wheel was spinning loose. The sails were in bad shape, some torn and flapping, but the ship was not a wreck. It was still fighting to move forward. The men walked the deck, their boots thumping on the wood. They checked the galley. There was water on the floor, but plenty of food in the pantry. They checked the cargo hold. It was packed with 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol. It was worth a fortune. Pirates would have taken it. But it was all there. They went to the captain's cabin. This is where it got really spooky. Inside, they found a scene of normal life interrupted. There were clothes folded, there was a rosewood melodeon, a type of small organ. There were toys belonging to a child. The ship's logbook lay open on the desk. The final entry was dated 10 days earlier. Think about that for a second. This ship had been sailing itself, ghosting through the Atlantic for a week and a half without a single human hand touching the ropes. The crew of the Dei Gratia checked everywhere. They looked for red stains, they looked for signs of a fight. They looked for scorch marks from a fire. There was absolutely nothing. It was as if the people on board had just evaporated. The only thing missing was the ship's single lifeboat and a few navigation instruments. The rope that secured the lifeboat was trailing in the water, frayed at the end. It looked like it had been cut or snapped under tension. That was the first big clue, but at the time, the sailors were too spooked to analyze it. They just wanted to get this ghost ship into port. But here is the catch. The ship wasn't just empty, it felt wrong. The sailors found a sword under the captain's bed. It had reddish stains on it. They found deep scratches on the wooden railing of the ship. To their eyes, it looked like a battle had taken place. They started to imagine a takeover, a struggle, or something worse. When they went below deck, they found about 3.5 feet of water in the hold. Now, for a landlubber, that sounds like a sinking ship. But for a wooden cargo ship, that is actually not that much water. The Mary Celeste was still floating high. She was safe. That is what made no sense. Why would a captain who had spent his whole life at sea abandon a ship that was floating perfectly fine? It was like leaving a car on the highway just because it had a flat tire, except the ocean is much more unforgiving than the highway. The Dei Gratia crew decided to split up. 3 men went on to the Mary Celeste and the rest stayed behind. They sailed both ships to Gibraltar, which was hundreds of miles away. The men on the ghost ship were terrified the whole time. They later said they felt like they were being watched. They reported strange creaks and groans from the hull that sounded like voices. It was probably just the wood settling, but fear makes the mind do crazy things. When they finally arrived in Gibraltar, the world was waiting for answers. But instead of a simple explanation, the arrival of the Mary Celeste kicked off a global frenzy. Everyone wanted to know what happened to the 10 souls on board, and when the answers didn't come, people started making them up. But as strange as the discovery was, the background of the people involved makes the mystery even harder to explain. 10 lives erased by the sea. To understand why this mystery is so frustrating, you have to look at the people involved. These were not rookies. Benjamin Spooner Briggs was a pro. He came from a family of sea captains in Massachusetts. He was strict, religious, and totally sober. He did not drink alcohol, which is ironic considering his cargo. He was the kind of guy who planned everything. He brought his wife, Sarah, along for the trip. Sarah was tough. She had sailed with him before. She knew how to handle the rough Atlantic. They also brought their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia. They left their 7-year-old son, Arthur, back home with his grandmother so he could go to school. That detail matters. You do not leave your son behind if you are planning to disappear or commit a crime. You leave him behind because you fully expect to be back in a few months. The crew was handpicked. There were 7 sailors, mostly German and American, all with clean records. These were men who wanted to get paid and go home to their families. There was no history of bad blood between them, so the idea of a mutiny just does not fit the profile. But while the people were solid, the ship itself had a dark cloud over it. Before she was the Mary Celeste, she was called the Amazon, and the Amazon was bad news from day one. She was built in Nova Scotia in 1861. On her very first voyage, her captain caught pneumonia and passed away. That is a bad omen among sailors. On her next trip, she hit a fishing weir. Then she had a collision in the English Channel. A few years later, she was driven ashore in a storm. By the time she was bought by American owners and renamed Mary Celeste, she had a reputation. Sailors are superstitious. They talk. Some say the ship was cursed, that she did not want to be tamed. The new owners spent $10,000 fixing her up. They made her deeper, wider, and stronger. She looked brand new, but you cannot rebuild luck. When Briggs took command in New York, he wrote a letter to his mother. He said the ship was in beautiful trim and he expected a fine passage. He was optimistic. The weather was good, the cargo was loaded, it looked like an easy run to Italy. But here's the thing about the ocean. It does not care about your plans. As they sailed past the Azores, the weather turned. For days, they battled high winds and cold rain. The ship was tossing and turning. Inside the hold, those 1,700 barrels of alcohol were shifting. 9 of those barrels were made of red oak, a wood that is more porous than white oak. That means liquid can seep through it. Slowly, invisibly, alcohol fumes began to leak out. They filled the dark, cramped spaces of the hold. The crew would have smelled it, a sharp, stinging scent of raw spirit. On a wooden ship lit by oil lamps and pipes, a hold full of explosive gas is a ticking time bomb. But Briggs had another problem. The ship had recently carried coal. Coal dust is nasty stuff. It gets everywhere. It can wash down into the bilge pumps, the machines that pump water out of the bottom of the ship. Investigators later found that one of the pumps was taken apart on the deck. That tells us something huge. The pump was clogged. Briggs could not pump out the water, and because the cargo was packed so tight, he could not measure the water level in the bottom of the ship. Imagine the stress. You are in a storm, your wife and baby are on board, you smell explosive fumes, and you have no idea if your ship is filling with water because your pumps are broken. The panic starts to set in. It is the perfect storm of small problems adding up to one giant disaster. And let's talk about the cargo again. Industrial alcohol is not vodka, it is dangerous stuff. If it gets loose, it creates a vapor that is heavier than air. It sinks into the lowest parts of the ship, waiting for a spark. The crew would have been living on top of a potential volcano. Also, we need to look at the psychological state of the crew. They had been at sea for a month. The weather had been terrible for the last few days. The constant motion of the ship, the noise of the wind, the damp cold, it wears you down. And now the captain is worried. The captain is the glue that holds the ship together. If the captain gets scared, the crew gets terrified. We know Briggs was a careful man. He would not take unnecessary risks. So whatever happened, whatever triggered the evacuation, it must have been something that convinced him that staying on the ship was a fatal outcome. He didn't leave because he was bored. He didn't leave because he was not thinking straight. He left because he thought he had no other choice. But the world didn't see it that way. When the ship arrived in Gibraltar, the logical explanations were thrown out the window. The public didn't want a story about pumps and fumes. They wanted drama. They wanted mystery. And they were about to get a century's worth of it. Once the ship was in port, the theory started to spiral completely out of control. How fiction became the truth. When the Mary Celeste arrived in Gibraltar, the authorities were suspicious immediately. The man in charge of the inquiry was Frederick Solly Flood. He was the Attorney General of Gibraltar, and honestly, he was looking for a fight. He did not believe in ghost ships. He believed in crime. Flood was convinced that the crew of the Dei Gratia had done away with everyone on the Mary Celeste to claim the salvage money. He analyzed the ship like a crime scene. He found a reddish stain on a sword in the captain's cabin and claimed it was something sinister. He found marks on the bow and said they were made by an axe, but science proved him wrong. The red stain turned out to be rust. The axe marks were just natural wear and tear from the waves. There was zero evidence of foul play. When that theory failed, the public went wild with their own ideas. People love a good story, and the truth was too boring for them. Let's start with the mutiny theory. This was the favorite for a long time. The idea was that the crew got into the alcohol, got drunk, took out the captain and his family, and then fled in the lifeboat. It sounds dramatic, right? Like a movie. But here is the problem. The alcohol was denatured. That means it was poisonous. If you drank it, you wouldn't get a buzz. You would lose your sight or suffer greatly. Plus, the crew's personal belongings were still there. If you take out the captain and steal the ship's boat, you take your stuff. You take your money. They left everything. Then came the sea monster theory. This was the late 1800s. People still believed in the Kraken. Writers claimed a giant squid or octopus had plucked the crew off the deck one by one. It sounds ridiculous now, but back then the ocean was still a place of monsters in the public mind. Can you imagine a squid snatching 10 people without breaking a single railing or knocking over a chair? It is impossible. Another wild theory was the ergot poisoning. Ergot is a fungus that grows on rye bread, especially in damp conditions. If you eat it, it causes hallucinations, paranoia, and confusion. It is basically the same chemical as LSD. The theory goes that the bread on board went moldy, the crew ate it, and they all lost their minds. They hallucinated a fire or a monster and jumped into the sea. It is a fascinating idea, but there was no sign of moldy bread found, and the logbook entries were perfectly rational right up until the end. Then there is the swimming challenge theory. This one is almost funny if it wasn't so tragic. Some people suggested that the captain and crew decided to go for a swim in the middle of the Atlantic. Maybe the captain built a swimming platform for his wife and it broke? Or maybe they were becalmed and jumped in to cool off, but then a breeze blew the ship away. It is absurd. No experienced captain would let his entire crew jump off a ship in the deep ocean with no one left on board to drop a ladder. Let's get darker. The insurance fraud conspiracy. People whispered that Captain Briggs and Captain Morehouse of the Dei Gratia were actually secret partners. The theory is that they planned to meet in the middle of the ocean. Briggs would hand over the ship, disappear with his family, and Morehouse would claim the salvage money and split it. But think about the logistics. How do two sailing ships find each other in the middle of the Atlantic in 1872? They didn't have GPS, they didn't have radios. The chances of missing each other were huge. Plus, if Briggs wanted to fake his passing, why leave his son Arthur behind? It doesn't fit the profile of a loving father. And of course, we have to mention the Atlantis and Bermuda Triangle theories. Even though the Mary Celeste was nowhere near the Bermuda Triangle, later writers tried to link it. They said the ship was abducted by aliens or swallowed by a vortex. These theories usually pop up when people run out of logical ideas. They are fun for TV shows, but they have zero evidence. There was also the waterspout theory. A waterspout is a tornado at sea. It acts like a vacuum, sucking up water and air. If a waterspout hit the ship, it could have lowered the air pressure so much that it sucked the water out of the bilge and into the hold, making the crew think they were sinking. It explains the panic, but waterspouts usually destroy sails and rigging. The Mary Celeste was mostly undamaged. The biggest damage to the truth came from a famous writer. Arthur Conan Doyle, the guy who created Sherlock Holmes, wrote a short story in 1884 called J. Habakkuk Jeffson's Statement. It was fiction, a made-up story about a vengeful ex-slave who hijacks the ship. But Doyle made it sound so real that people believed it. He changed the name slightly to Mary Celeste, and that is why you still hear people call it that today. He added details about half-eaten breakfasts and smoking pipes left on tables. None of that was true. The Dei Gratia crew never found warm food, but the image stuck. The real story was buried under 50 years of garbage. The legend of the ghost ship became more famous than the actual tragedy. People forgot about Sarah Briggs and her baby. They became characters in a horror movie, not real victims. It was not until modern science stepped in that we started to clear away the fog. And what they found was not a monster or a villain. It was basic chemistry. This brings us to the most credible yet terrifying theory before the 2025 breakthrough. The science behind the fear. Let's dig deeper into that explosion theory because it is the only one that fits all the physical evidence. We are back in 1872. The Mary Celeste is rocking in the swells. The smell of alcohol is strong enough to make your eyes water. The crew is nervous. They know that alcohol burns. They are living on top of a volcano. One day, maybe while they are airing out the hold, a spark ignites the fumes. Maybe it was a friction spark from a metal band on a barrel. Maybe it was a pipe. Whoosh! The pressure wave blasts the main hatch cover into the air. It is terrifying. But the fire goes out instantly because it burns up all the oxygen in the hold in a split second. In 2006, a scientist named Dr. Andrea Sella did an experiment that changed everything. He built a replica of the Mary Celeste's hold. He filled it with butane gas to simulate the alcohol fumes. Then he created a spark. What happened next was shocking. It was not a fire that burned the wood, it was a pressure wave. A poof of flame that blasted open the hatches, pushed a massive wave of hot air out, and then vanished. It left no scorch marks. It did not burn the barrels. If this happened on the Mary Celeste, it explains the missing hatch covers. It explains why there was no fire damage, and it explains why a veteran captain would panic. Imagine standing on the deck. Suddenly, a hatch blows open with a roar of blue flame. The ship shakes. You think the cargo is about to blow the ship to splinters. You have seconds to act. Briggs made the call to abandon ship, but he did not mean to leave forever. He meant to get off, wait to see if the ship exploded, and then climb back on. He orders everyone to the lifeboat. This is not a panic run, it is a controlled evacuation. They grab some food, but they leave their clothes, they leave their money, they leave their pipes. This tells us they expected to come back. They crowd into the small yawl boat. 10 people in a boat meant for 6. It is tight, it is wet. They toss a line to the Mary Celeste, a tow rope. They want to drift behind the ship, keeping a safe distance until the danger passes. This is a standard procedure. You do not just cut yourself loose in the middle of the Atlantic unless you have to. So there they are, bobbing in the freezing waves, watching their ship. They wait. 5 minutes, 10 minutes. The ship does not explode. The smoke clears. The sails of the Mary Celeste are still catching the wind. The ship is pulling at the rope, and then disaster strikes. The rope breaks. This has always been the main theory. The rope snapped, the ship sailed away faster than they could row, and they were left behind to perish from exposure. It makes sense, but it always felt like we were missing a piece of the puzzle. Why did the rope break? It was a heavy-duty line. The weather was rough, but was it rough enough to snap a fresh tow line? Historians have argued about this for decades. Some said it was just bad luck. Some said the knot came loose. Some said the captain cut it in a panic. But hemp rope is strong. It is designed to pull ships. It shouldn't just snap like a piece of thread. This is where the story usually ends, a broken rope and bad luck. But in 2025, a researcher digging through the archives of the salvage hearing found a detail that everyone had overlooked, a description of the rope fibers found remaining on the Mary Celeste. They used modern spectral imaging on similar rope samples from that era that had been exposed to industrial alcohol fumes. And what they found changes the physics of the whole event. It turns out the alcohol did not just scare the crew. It sabotaged their escape. Why they could never go back. Here is the twist that finally broke in 2025. For years, we assumed the tow line broke because of the waves, but a new study published by maritime forensic experts took a closer look at how hemp rope reacts to high concentrations of ethanol vapor, the exact stuff leaking from the barrels. The study showed that when natural hemp fibers are exposed to concentrated alcohol fumes and then immediately subjected to cold salt water and tension, the fibers degrade almost instantly. The chemical reaction makes the rope brittle. It loses its elasticity. It essentially turns the strong rope into a brittle stick. So, when the blast happened, the crew used a rope that had been stored near the open hatch or had been lying on the deck where the fumes were venting. They tied their lifeboat to the Mary Celeste with this compromised line. As soon as the main ship surged forward on a wave, the rope did not stretch like it was supposed to. It snapped. This changes the narrative completely. It was not just bad weather, it was the cargo again. The same cargo that caused the explosion also destroyed their lifeline. But there is more. The 2025 analysis also looked at the weather patterns using AI modeling that was not available even 10 years ago. We used to think the weather was just rough. The new models show that on that specific morning, a localized high-pressure ridge created a phenomenon called a microburst of wind right in that sector. So, picture this. The rope snaps because it is chemically weakened. At that exact moment, a freak gust of wind hits the sails of the Mary Celeste. The ship lurches forward, picking up speed instantly. The crew in the lifeboat grabs the oars. They row with everything they have. Benjamin Briggs is screaming orders. The sailors are pulling until their muscles burn. But the Mary Celeste is a fast ship. She was built for speed. Within minutes, she is 100 yards away. Then 200, then she is just a silhouette against the gray sky. The tragedy is that the Mary Celeste was perfectly safe. The fire was out. The pumps could have been fixed. The ship sailed on for weeks on its own, proving how seaworthy she was. The crew passed away watching their salvation sail away from them. They were left in a 20-foot boat 400 miles from land with no water, no heavy coats, and no sail. Hypothermia would have set in within hours. The Atlantic in December is unforgiving. This new detail makes the story even more tragic. It was not a monster, it was not a crime, it was a chemical reaction in a piece of rope. A tiny, invisible failure that cost 10 people their lives. But here's the catch. The story didn't end with the disappearance. The Mary Celeste had a second life. After the court case, she was sold, but her reputation was ruined. Sailors didn't want to work on her, they said she was cursed. Over the next 12 years, she changed hands 17 times. Every owner lost money on her. Finally, in 1885, a shady captain named Gilman Parker bought her. He loaded her with a cargo of cheap boots and cat food, but insured it for a fortune. He sailed her to Haiti and deliberately rammed her into a coral reef to claim the insurance. But even then, the Mary Celeste refused to sink. She sat on the reef, refusing to break apart, exposing the fraud. Captain Parker was caught and ruined. He passed away 3 months later. The ship that wouldn't die finally rotted away in the sun, but the mystery of the missing crew remained. Until now. We think we have solved it. We think the 2025 data closes the book. The chemical analysis of the rope fibers explains the break. The AI weather model explains the drift. The experiment with the butane explains the lack of fire. But the ocean is deep and it keeps its secrets well. Maybe there is one more detail waiting to be found. Maybe the logbook had a page torn out. Maybe there is a message in a bottle buried in the sand of some lonely island. For now, the image that sticks with us is not a ghost. It is a family, a father trying to protect his child, a mother holding her baby tight, a crew trusting their captain, and a piece of rope fraying in the wind about to snap and change history forever. So next time you look at the ocean, remember the Mary Celeste. It is not a story about a ghost ship, it is a story about how fragile safety really is. One loose barrel, one spark, one brittle rope. That is all it took to turn a family trip into a mystery that would last forever. The sea is beautiful, but it is also a machine that can erase you in seconds. And sometimes the scariest thing is not what is in the water, it is what is in the air you breathe. So, do you think the chemical rope theory finally solves it, or is the sea monster story actually more believable? Drop a comment below with your wildest theory. If you want more cold cases cracked by science, smash that like button and subscribe. See you in the next mystery.